When I was 14, I went on a cruise with my parents. The cruise honestly was a very cheap one. My parents did not like it. At night there were people in their 20s partying and being incredibly loud all night long, and my parents found it very difficult to relax anywhere other than their stateroom. I had more fun than they did, especially because they allowed me to walk around by myself sometimes. I had to be back in my room by 10 o'clock, but from like 8 o'clock to 10, I could pretty much walk around and do whatever I wanted. I tried to talk to a few other teenagers that I saw, but I didn't really make any friends. One night, I was sitting on the top deck, just scrolling on my phone. I wasn't right next to the railing, which was about 5 feet high, but I was about 10 yards away from it, sitting at a table, minding my own business, just enjoying the night air. Honestly, looking over the side of the ship and into the dark abyss of the black ocean at night was the creepiest thing I had ever seen. I looked over the railing a few times on that cruise, and I will never forget what it looked like. It looked like death. Cold, black, lonely death. It was funny, honestly, because during the day, the ocean was bright blue and beautiful, super peaceful. At night, not so much. So as I sit in my chair with my feet up on another chair, I looked up to my left and saw a man and woman walk out of the stairway door, and they were obviously very drunk. They were falling over and slurring their words like crazy. I couldn't even understand what they were saying to each other. The huge umbrella that would normally be standing up and positioned into the hole in the center of the table I was sitting at was laying down next to me, next to the table and my chair, blocking my vision from these people. I had to lean back to see them. They stumbled over to the railing of the ship, and immediately my knees became weak at the thought of them falling overboard. I actually thought this was a possibility because of how drunk they seemed to be. Well, they began making out, and I felt uncomfortable watching, so I leaned forward again and resumed scrolling the pictures on my phone to the table and I couldn't hear anything except distant people laughing and partying somewhere else on the ship and the crashing of the waves below. After a minute or so, out of curiosity, I leaned back again to see the couple, and the woman was gone. The man was still standing there, just looking over the side. I immediately became very aware that man did not know I was there, and my blood turned cold when I realized at the same time that I was pretty sure he had just pushed her, threw her, or did something to that woman. The man then just turned around and stumbled back to the door and down the stairs. After a minute of heavy contemplation, I got up, walked over to the railing, and looked down into the dark ocean. I almost got sick to my stomach as I saw what a horrid and excruciatingly terrifying death it would be to fall into that abyss. Everything was silent except for the waves. I had to leave. I went back to my room early, and I told my parents what I thought I witnessed. They did not believe me, and they didn't take me seriously. 3 days later, we left that ship, and I honestly still think about it all the time. And this happened 8 years ago. I will never know if that woman fell or if she was pushed. But I can tell you this. There's no way she walked away in the seconds that I was not looking, and the door made a very loud noise when it was opened and closed. She went into the water that night, and I have had a few nightmares of falling overboard myself. I really wish I would have said something to someone else other than my passive parents. Not that it would have helped that poor woman. I wonder often what she was thinking as she hit the water and got pulled under the ship into the freezing cold, dark hell that the ocean is at night. Five years ago, I worked as a CNA at an East Tennessee nursing home. While working there was a resident named Helen, and upon getting my hall assignment, I was told by my hall partner that everyone that worked there believed her to be possessed. Right, whatever. Helen turned out to be one of the more difficult residents, to say the least. She was wheelchair bound and would scoot herself up and down the hall, muttering to herself, and sometimes without warning, she would attack someone close to her, be it a fellow resident, staff, or visitor, clawing, hitting, kicking, until she was pulled off of the poor person. She did have incredible strength when these attacks happened, and she would growl these deep, guttural growls. We ended up having to keep her isolated in a room alone, with her wheelchair locked to keep the other residents safe. A few months into the job, I switched to night shift on the same hall because the shift differential was a little over $1 more on the hour. I was told by the night shift nurse that Helen was just as much a handful at night as she was in the day. One night, a new charge nurse had gotten assigned to my hall. In the mornings before day shift started, the nurse had to give all morning meds. I warned her not to interact with Helen unless I was with her. "That little bitty old thing?" she asked. "She can't be more than 85 pounds soaking wet." 87 and a half, I said, "and it takes 5 CNAs to bathe her." She looked at me like she didn't believe me, but agreed to let me know before she medicated her. Right before I started my end of shift charting, the nurse told me she was ready to administer Helen's meds. I nodded, stood up, and followed her to Helen's room, where she lay restrained. I went to get a pair of gloves from the dispenser, but they were empty. I turned to the nurse and said, "I'll run to the stockroom for a box of gloves. Don't touch her until I get back." I saw the nurse roll her eyes as I exited the room. Coming back from the stockroom, I heard cries of help ringing down the hall. The CNA from the adjacent hall was already running towards the sound, and I followed. The source was the ever-doubting newbie nurse who had undone the wrist straps of the sweet old lady and was now being clawed at. She had a handful of her hair from the back of her head and was digging her fingers into her throat, which was all scratched up and bleeding. Helen was screaming in a guttural rasp, "I hate you." It took me, the other CNA, and another nurse to pry Helen's fingers off of the poor lady and restrain her once again. The nurse from the other hall was cleaning my nurse's wounds while I took down an incident report. She said through sobs that after I left, Helen spoke to her in a sweet voice, told her good morning, and smiled at her. She asked if she would mind helping her to the bathroom. Helen was incontinent and hadn't used a toilet in over a year. The nurse told her that of course she would, and removed the wrist restraints, when Helen suddenly pounced. She cried harder, saying, her voice, even the smell of her completely changed. The nurse had deep lacerations to her throat and was missing a patch of hair. Helen had ripped it from her skull. That nurse quit that night. There were many other instances, too. I became terrified of caring for that woman. The worst happened on my last night working at the nursing home. I was about to leave. I had already clocked out, but remembered that I needed to tell the day shift CNAs about a resident having an out-of-facility doctor appointment that one of them would have to ride with them to. I spotted them down the hall and called out to them, walking in their direction. I was passing Helen's room, did a double take, and stopped dead in my tracks. Day shift had already gotten Helen up and in her wheelchair. It was in its locked position in the middle of her room, but she somehow had gotten one hand free from the restraint and was chewing the index finger of said hand. It was all a blur. I screamed something. I ran into the room, and the day shift and nurse ran after me. It took all of us to wrestle her finger out of her mouth. She screamed and growled in protest the entire time. Mouth and yellow, jagged teeth covered in blood and bits of flesh. Helen had chewed the meat off of her finger. The doctor was called in, and he said that he had never seen anything like it, and she would need skin graft surgery. It was more than I could take. I walked out of that nursing home and never went back. I didn't give any notice. I didn't even call. I remained traumatized by Helen, and I never worked as a CNA again. I'm a long-haul driver for a moving company, and my last run will be the last one that I ever drive. I'm in Minnesota, on my way to Portland, Oregon. The first 2 days driving was fine, a little tight on time, but not too bad. The third day, I will never forget. I had run out of time, and I was not able to find a room to stay at in Montana, so I had to sleep in my truck. It's not a sleeper cab, just a normal box truck. I've done this before, so all was fine. I was in the mountains, and I was the only one parked at this rest stop. I knew that the next town is about 30 miles behind me. It was about 11:30 at night, and I'm getting ready to go to sleep. But then, for what felt like no reason at all the hair on my body stood on end, and I froze as I looked out the windshield, and there was a man standing about 20 feet away, just staring at me. I sat there frozen for what felt like an eternity. He began to slowly move away, all the while making eye contact as he backed up. Once he was out of sight, I was on edge for another hour or so, constantly checking the windows. I finally became relaxed enough to try and get some sleep, and that was the worst idea I could have had at that time. I was abruptly woken up by this scream. It sounded like nothing I can describe. It was harrowing and terrifying. I'm a big guy. I was in my 20s and 6 foot tall, but this sound woke me up and put me into such a panic and fear that I will never forget. I turned on all the lights in the truck, and what I saw, I can never unsee. The man was standing right in front of the truck, completely naked, with blood all over his face. He began rapidly running around the truck, pounding on the doors and trying to open them. I was so terrified I couldn't move. He began to throw rocks at the windows, and they began to crack. This broke me out of my trance of pure fear, and I started my truck. I floored it, trying to get away as fast as the truck would go, but it wasn't accelerating as it should. It crawled forward slowly, and then I realized he had slashed all of the tires. I was trapped in this box with no escape, no cell signal, and 30 miles away from anything or anybody else. I thought for sure I was dead. But there was one place that I might be able to make it to, the restroom. I could lock the door if I could make it, but that was a good 200 feet away, and there was a lunatic with a knife outside. I watched as he kept going around the truck and waited for him to get to the back. That would give me the best chance of getting away. As soon as he was midway up the passenger side, I opened the door and ran like hell. I made it to the bathroom and locked the door right when he slammed into it, and he began screaming maniacally. I backed up to the wall and just waited. I stayed in that bathroom until morning, when eventually the screams stopped, and after a while, someone knocked on the door. The knock was gentle, and eventually a woman spoke. Hello, is anyone in there? This is Montana State Patrol. I was so on edge, I demanded to see her credentials. She slid them under the door, and after examining them, I opened up. She gave me a pleasant smile, and I peered behind her at my truck. There was blood all over my windows. I was taken to the hospital due to dehydration and shock. All is well now, but you better believe I quit that job. This happened 4 years ago when I was 16 years old. Nothing scary has ever really happened to me apart from this. One night I woke up, needing desperately to use the bathroom. My house was pitch black. Only the vague orange light from the street lamps through my blinds made my room just barely visible. The first thing I noticed is that the air was absolutely freezing. It was winter after all, but I didn't realize my house was so poor at retaining heat overnight. The thought passed, and I fumbled my way along the hallway, holding onto the banister as I made my way to the bathroom. I waved my hand, about to pull the string that turned on the light. I pulled it, and then the overly bright light in the bathroom turned on, and I squinted. I did my business, and just as I was about to exit the bathroom, I looked through the slightly ajar door, and there was a window I could see at the bottom of the stairs.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more.
I thought it was time that we switch over to another podcast.
The free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello and welcome to the program, UFO Warning. Today's topic, Elon Musk puts out alien tweet, then backtracks. That's correct. Elon Musk put out a very interesting alien tweet and then backtracked. It seems aliens were on Elon's mind because at 11:14 p.m., July 30th, he put out the following tweet. He says, aliens built the pyramids OBV. In other words, aliens built the pyramids. Obvious. Very interesting. So we can tell from Elon's tweet that it appears he believes that it was obvious that aliens built the pyramids. Now, a lot of people do believe that aliens were involved in the constructions of those pyramids in Egypt. These are massive stone buildings. They were built over 2,400 years ago, I think they said, and they were built in a time before iron was invented. There's a great question as to how these things were put up, and Elon says aliens built the pyramids. Obvious. Goes on, the next tweet says, Ramses the second was, and then it has an emoji for cool. It has a little smiley face with the sunglasses. Then he says, the Great Pyramid was the tallest structure made by humans for 3,800 years. 3,800 years, he repeats, and then he has a link to Wikipedia. Then, a day later, now this is a weird part, Elon tweets again. After a day's passed, after he's told us that aliens built the pyramids, that it's obvious, after he makes a little emoji about Ramses II, and after he points out to the fact that those pyramids were the tallest man-made, quote-unquote, structures on Earth for 3,800 years, then he seems to have a change of heart. The next tweet says, this BBC article provides a sensible summary for how it was done. Wow. You have to wonder if Elon didn't get a visit from the MIB. Maybe he got a call from the Men in Black. But it seems as though we see this reoccurring pattern where a politician or a celebrity will come out and say something where they they seem to have an epiphany or recognition of the paranormal activity around them, and then they just shut it down. Now, I don't know if Elon was worried about the stock price in Tesla, or if maybe he just had a few too many drinks that night, or whatever his choice is, and he lost control of his Twitter tongue. But it almost seems like maybe there was an intervention done on Elon, because this isn't the only thing he backtracked on. He also made some other comments that are a little bit disturbing involving China and kind of putting down the United States. But first, I want to look at this first article that summarizes what happened. And this is from Fox News, and the article is from August 2nd. This came out about 11 hours ago at the time of this podcast. It says, Egyptians tell Musk pyramids not built by aliens, invite him to visit. And the article is by Peter Atkin. It says Fox News. Let me get this up here just a minute. It goes on, it says, Egyptians urged Elon Musk to visit Egypt and to further research the pyramids after he appeared to claim that the ancient structures were built by aliens, according to reports. And then it has a tweet from Elon Musk, 11/14, July 30th, 2020. Aliens built the pyramids, OBV. SpaceX founder Musk has a history of erratic tweets, making bold claims on the social media platform that divide observers. On Friday, Musk was at it again when he tweeted that aliens built the pyramids. Obvious, OBV. A message that was retweeted over 84,000 times by Sunday morning. The message struck a nerve in Egypt, with leaders and experts from the country responding to the conspiracy theory. Man, they really got a couple good punches there on old Elon. First, they tell us that he has a history of erratic tweets. It's kind of like they're going to give you a heads up. Now, you know, this guy does have this super successful little company called Tesla, where he's building electric cars, you know, seemingly as fast as they can sell them. Stock price seems to be off the charts. He also has that space company, SpaceX, where they're all tied up with the U.S. government. I think they just dropped one of their space delivery vehicles. Just dropped a couple of astronauts into the ocean the first time in, I don't know, 3 decades or something. They're planning this mission to Mars. So the guy can't be stupid, can he? I mean, he's running two, that I know of, probably 3 or 4 or 5, I don't know, successful companies all at the same time. But they describe him as somebody making erratic tweets. And then down here, we've got to get that all-important word in, conspiracy theory. Well, you know, Elon Musk, as smart as he is, they couldn't call him a conspiracy.
Thank you very much. All right, let's move on to the next podcast. This is Weird Darkness.
Looking for more energy and blood pressure support? Hurry to CVS to find SuperBeets products, including their SuperBeets Chews. SuperBeets Chews use 2 of nature's most heart-friendly foods, grapeseed extract and beets, and pair them up with CVS. Looking for more energy and blood pressure support? Hurry to Beets Chews includes clinically researched grapeseed extract.
Only. Parental discretion is strongly advised.
Welcome, Weirdos. I'm Darren Marlar, and this is Weird Darkness. Here you'll find stories of the paranormal, supernatural, legends, lore, crime, conspiracy, mysterious, macabre, unsolved, and unexplained. Coming up in this episode of Weird Darkness. It was a terrible sight. I have seen horrible sights, but never anything like this. Those were the words of the local undertaker after seeing the result of a triple murder laying before him in 1932 Pennsylvania. Have you heard of the poor girl who was bullied and pushed down into a sewer by those whom she thought were her friends? I'll tell you the story. And while this episode is not a creepypasta episode, so all the stories are supposed to be nonfiction, that is, true, I'll be sharing this urban legend anyway. Because when it comes to urban legends, sometimes it's best to err on the side of caution and simply assume they are true. A gypsy once told Leonarda that all of her children would die before her. A different fortune-teller told her that she faced either a future in prison or in a criminal asylum. And the reason she gave for becoming a serial killer is something you'd hear out of a bad direct-to-video horror film. And that's a tiny sample of this woman's insanely dark life, which began even before her birth. Ireland's Loftus Hall is considered by many to be the most haunted location on all the Emerald Isle. But the most infamous story of Loftus Hall begins not with terror but with romance, with a beautiful young girl falling madly in love with the devil. Weirdo family member Brad Hicks describes the experience as cool and creepy as hell. We'll tell you his story. While you're listening, you might want to check out the Weird Darkness website. At WeirdDarkness.com, you can sign up for the newsletter, find transcripts of the episodes, paranormal and horror audiobooks I've narrated, 24/7 streaming video of horror hosts and classic horror movies. You can find my other podcast, Church of the Undead. Plus, you can visit the Hope in the Darkness page if you're struggling with depression, anxiety, or thoughts of suicide. And you can also shop the Weird Darkness store where all profits go to support depression awareness and relief. You can find all of that and more at WeirdDarkness.com. Now, bolt your doors, lock your windows, turn off your lights, and come with me into the Weird Darkness. Rome's Museo Criminological Museum, may not be to everybody's taste, but it's definitely worth seeing. The museum's collection features photographs and memorabilia from some of the most gruesome forensic cases in the long history of Italy. And this story is about to get gruesome. From Renaissance murders to the mafia, this museum has it all. It was there that I first learned about Leonarda Cianciulli, also known as the soap maker of Correggio, and her bizarre criminal career. While almost unknown outside of Italy, Leonarda's career as a serial killer is still unparalleled in many ways, both for her unique method of concealing bodies and her rather odd motive for killing. Born in 1894, she was raised in one of the most poverty-stricken regions of Italy. Her mother, Amelia Dinolfi, had become pregnant due to rape and was later forced to marry her rapist, Mariotto Cianciulli, when she realized she was pregnant. By most accounts, Amelia's daughter, Leonarda's early childhood was a grim one. Her father died when Leonarda was young, but her mother's later remarriage did little to ease the situation at home. Due to emotional abuse by her mother, she would make 2 suicide attempts. Leonarda compounded her woes by marrying a man of whom her parents disapproved. They had a more prosperous suitor in mind. She would later claim that her mother had placed a curse on her as a result of her 1914 marriage of Raphael Pensardi, and the tragedy she later endured seems to bear that out. Along with being imprisoned for fraud and later seeing her house destroyed by an earthquake, she also lost 3 of her children in childbirth and another 10 as children. Of her 17 pregnancies, only 4 survived to adulthood, and she was especially protective of all of them as a result. Despite these troubles, she and her husband eventually settled in the town of Correggio near Naples, and Leonarda apparently settled into a normal life as a shopkeeper and part-time fortune teller. A long-time believer in the supernatural, she had once consulted a gypsy fortune teller who, among other things, predicted that all of her children would die before her. A different fortune teller told her that she faced either a future in prison or in a criminal asylum, though Leonarda seemed not to take that warning seriously. Her neighbors would later describe her as a gentle soul with a fondness for poetry. Nobody suspected what would be coming next. For Leonarda, everything changed in 1939 when Benito Mussolini began drafting young men to prepare for Italy's entry into World War II. El Duce's popularity had slipped during the 1930s, and the prospect of Italy entering the war on the side of Nazi Germany alarmed most Italians. Leonarda became mentally unbalanced at the thought of her favorite son, Giuseppe, being drafted and possibly dying in combat. The prospect of losing Giuseppe apparently led to her decision to carry out human sacrifices to preserve her son from death. As she would later state during her testimony, killing others would keep her own children safe by providing God with other deaths in place of her own children. Since she had 4 remaining children, she would need to sacrifice 4 others to keep them safe. Her first victim was a 50-year-old spinster named Faustina Setti. Recruiting Leonarda as a fortune teller and matchmaker, Faustina paid her 30,000 lire to find a suitable husband. Telling her that she knew of a good marriage prospect in a nearby village, Leonarda persuaded Faustina to write letters and postcards to relatives that she would later post from out of town to reassure them she was fine. She also instructed Faustina not to tell anyone about her marriage plans. On the day Faustina was to leave Correggio, she visited Leonarda's home for one last time. There, Leonardo gave her drugged wine and then chopped her body into 9 pieces with a hatchet. According to the official statement she gave to police afterward, "I threw the pieces into a pot, added 7 kilos of caustic soda, which I had bought to make soap, and stirred the whole mixture until the pieces dissolved in a thick, dark mush that I poured into several buckets and emptied in a nearby septic tank. As for the blood in the basin, I waited until it had coagulated, dried it in the oven, ground it and mixed it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs, as well as a bit of margarine, kneading all the ingredients together. I made lots of crunchy tea cakes and served them to the ladies who came to visit, though Giuseppe and I also ate them." After pocketing the money Faustina had brought with her, Leonarda selected fellow villager Francesca Salvi as her next victim. After telling Francesca that she found her a job at a school in Piacenza, Leonardo persuaded her to keep the job offer secret. She also persuaded Francesca to write a series of letters and postcards that would be mailed at a later date. Copying the murder of Faustina Setti almost exactly, Leonardo drugged Francesca and dismembered the corpse with an axe on September 5, 1940. She also pocketed her life savings, only 3,000 lire this time. Once again, no suspicion attached to her, so Leonarda was free to find another victim. It was this last victim who would prove to be her undoing. Virginia Cacioppo was a former soprano who had sung opera professionally at La Scala in Milan. She was also wealthier than Leonarda's other victims, with more than 50,000 lire in cash and jewelry. After Leonarda lured Virginia to her house with the promise of finding her a job with a mysterious impresario, she was killed like the other victims. In a last ghoulish touch, Leonarda added cologne to the soap she made from Virginia's remains to make it more appealing to friends and neighbors. Virginia Cacioppo's sister-in-law became suspicious and began investigating her disappearance. When she learned that Virginia had last been seen entering Leonarda's shop, she went to the police superintendent. Following an investigation, Leonarda Cianciulli was arrested for murder. She was unusually open with the police and described her crimes and how she disposed of the bodies in ghoulish detail. Since World War II was still underway, putting her on trial for the murders was hardly a priority, though. It was not until 1946 and Italy's defeat that the trial of the Correggio soapmaker finally began. And it was quite a trial. Though her son Giuseppe had been arrested as a possible accomplice, he was later freed. Leonarda's detailed confession of the murders, complete with descriptions of what she did with the bodies afterward, generated international publicity. During her testimony, she was quick to correct the prosecutor on any details which she regarded she considered inaccurate. At one point, she proudly pointed out that she, quote, "gave the copper ladle which I used to skim the fat off the kettles to my country, which was so badly in need of metal during the last days of the war," unquote. She also described her reason for the murders, including her desire to help her son with human sacrifice. Whether she truly believed what she had said in court or was hoping to avoid prison through an insanity plea, the graphic details of her crimes attracted a fair amount of public attention in a country still recovering from war. Found guilty by the court, Leonarda Cianciulli was sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a criminal asylum. While in prison, she wrote her memoirs, which translated reads Confessions of a Bitter Soul. Unrepentant to the last, Leonarda died of a stroke on October 15, 1970. As she would later insist, "I did not kill for greed," which I'm sure we can all agree flies into the face of common sense after killing 3 people and stealing their life.